Margaret, Robert, Thomas, Susan, Emily. 40 years married to Robert, 40 years tending the quiet flame of our life together within the walls of the house I designed myself. It feels like a lifetime. Back then, brimming with blueprints and ambition in my early 20s, I was one of the few women in the architecture program. I had plans, visions of structure and light. Then came Robert, solid, steady. A geologist captivated by deep time, he represented a secure harbor, a predictable life. The unspoken agreement was forged. His work, his world, took center stage. My architectural dreams were carefully rolled, stored away, replaced by the domestic geometry of meal planning, school schedules of when Thomas was young, and the social obligations of a professor's wife. I became the architect of our family's routines, a structure built on silent compromises, its foundation settling over buried aspirations. The approach of our 40th wedding anniversary stirred the household, or rather, it stirred our daughter-in-law, Susan. Married to our pragmatic son, Thomas, Susan views social events as projects, opportunities to showcase their success and impeccable taste. A party, she announced. A significant celebration for Mom and Dad's Ruby anniversary. The gesture was noted, but my own preference leaned towards quiet reflection. Perhaps a trip Robert and I had always talked about but never taken. Susan's plans, however, involved caterers flown in from the city, a string quartet, and a guest list heavily weighted towards Thomas's business world and her own social set. I attempted gently to steer the ship. Something smaller, perhaps, focused on family and our oldest friends. Susan, multitasking between her tablet and a call to a florist, brushed it off with practiced ease. 40 years, Margaret. It demanded something special. We need to make a statement. Thomas readily agreed, citing the invaluable networking potential. Robert predictably expressed hope only for the availability of decent single malt scotch before vanishing into his study, absorbed in cataloging his trilobite fossils. Even Emily, my 19-year-old granddaughter, home from college for the summer, suggesting lighting schemes she'd seen on Instagram. I felt like a figurehead on a ship sailing in a direction I hadn't chosen. Still, I tried to engage. Menu suggestions, dishes Robert and I actually enjoyed, were overridden by Susan's preference for fashionable, complicated hors d'oeuvres. My desire to seat my few remaining college friends prominently was met with concerns about disrupting the flow of the corporate guests. Each opinion I ventured was politely deflected or reinterpreted through the lens of Susan's grand vision. I was ostensibly the honoree, yet my input felt like mere static. The moment the foundations truly cracked, the incident that sent silent fissures through decades of quiet acceptance, occurred over Sunday coffee. Thomas, Susan, and Emily were reviewing seating charts. Susan sighed dramatically about the challenges of placing the bar area effectively on our patio. Thomas, ever the problem solver, tapped his chin. "You know, Mom," he mused, looking around our living room. "My living room designed for comfort and family, not galas. Maybe it's simpler to host at our place. The layout is much more open plan, better for mingling. And honestly, it just feels more celebratory, more modern." Susan seized on it instantly. "Thomas, yes, perfect. The caterers would have more space. People could spill out onto the lawn." They were off, sketching layouts on napkins, debating logistics for their house, their voices buzzing with an efficiency that completely excluded me. Robert nodded vaguely, already mentally classifying rock strata. Emily chimed in about coordinating with their neighbors for parking. No one noticed the sudden, profound stillness that fell over me. My house, the structure I had poured my younger self into, wrestling with lines and light, dreaming of the life that would unfold within its walls. It was the tangible result of my one great, unfulfilled passion. And now, for the celebration of my 40 years within it, it was deemed unsuitable, not modern enough. inconvenient, a relic. A familiar coldness, the chill of being unseen, settled deep. It wasn't just about the party anymore. It was about the dismissal of my contribution, my history, the very framework of my life. I let them plan, let them relocate the narrative of my marriage to their more convenient setting. Inside, a quiet demolition was underway. Later that day, after they'd gone, leaving a faint scent of expensive coffee and discarded plans, I found myself in the attic. Dust motes swirled in the inside. My thesis project, blueprints for a community arts center, 40 years dormant. As I carefully unrolled the brittle paper, the scent of time and forgotten dreams filling the air, something shifted, a structural reassessment, a possibility. Life after that Sunday felt different. The surface remained calm. I continued the routines, tending the garden, managing the household accounts, listening to Robert's detailed accounts of fossil discoveries. But beneath the placid surface, a quiet current of rebellion had begun to flow. The rediscovered blueprints weren't just paper. They were a reactivation of dormant circuits. A small back room, once intended as my study but long relegated to storage, became my secret workspace. I cleared the table, found my old drafting tools in a forgotten box, bought new paper and pens. Initially, I simply studied my old art center design, reacquainting myself with the language of lines and scale. Then, cautiously, I began to sketch again, not redesigning the past, but exploring new forms. Testing the steadiness of my hand, the tremor was there, a frustrating variable, but concentration sometimes held it at bay. Honing my eye, it was a quiet act of reclaiming territory within my own life. My family registered the shift only as a subtle decrease in my ambient availability. "Mom, Robert's favorite biscuits are gone. Could you whip up another batch?" Thomas might ask. "Susan's book club is meeting here Tuesday, Margaret. They always love your cheese straws," would be the reminder, phrased as a statement. My responses became gently evasive. "Oh, I'm not sure I'll have time for baking this week, Thomas. Or perhaps try that recipe from the magazine, Susan. I'm rather occupied." This minor resistance was met with puzzled frowns, sometimes a huff of impatience. The ever-reliable Margaret was developing static. Robert, immersed in the Paleozoic era, seemed to notice little, though he did remark one evening as I tidied away my drawing supplies. "Taking up sketching again, dear? How nice." Sketching. He made it sound like watercoloring kittens. I smiled noncommittally. My true haven became the architecture section of the city library. Surrounded by volumes showcasing soaring glass structures, innovative green buildings, and intimate, human-scaled designs, I felt a jolt of connection to a professional world I had only observed from the sideline. It was there, pinned amidst notices for lectures and software tutorials, that I saw it. A flyer announcing a design competition. The city was seeking proposals for revitalizing a neglected downtown parquet, a sad triangle of cracked pavement and struggling weeds ignored by passers-by. The budget was small, the scope limited, but the challenge, creating a welcoming, functional, beautiful public space, could I possibly, at 63, with skills 40 years out of date, and hands that sometimes betrayed me? The idea felt both ludicrous and irresistible. The memory of my house being dismissed as not modern enough stung. Maybe I could create something modern, something useful, something seen using my initials NPF. I explained my library trips and hours in the back room to my family as research for a local history project. They accepted this readily. Local history sounded suitably innocuous, a harmless pastime for a woman of my age. They had no concept of the scale models taking shape, the complex calculations, the sheer thrill and terror of designing again. The parquet became my focus. I visited the site repeatedly, observing the patterns of light and shadow, the flow of pedestrians, the sad state of the existing planting. I researched drought-tolerant native species, sustainable hardscaping, lighting that felt safe. Design began to form. The quiet knoll, a space centered around that lone, resilient oak tree, with pathways curving like unwinding ribbons, seating integrated into low retaining walls, and a slightly raised platform. The knoll, for quiet contemplation or informal gatherings, accessible to all via a graceful ramp. The focus demanded by the work often calmed the tremor, my hand steadier holding a tea-square than a teacup during strained family conversation. The anniversary party planning lumbered on, an expensive and personal behemoth orchestrated by Susan. She'd call, stressed about coordinating deliveries or managing RSPVs from people I didn't know. I'd offer detached, polite responses, my mind already back to the parquet, calculating load-bearing requirements or sketching planting details. The contrast was almost comical. Their frantic energy poured into a single evening of performative celebration. My quiet intensity focused on creating a small piece of enduring public space. One afternoon, Emily wandered into my workspace. She looked at the drawings pinned to the wall, the small cardboard model on the table. "Grandma, what is all this? It looks professional." I hesitated, then decided to trust her youthful lack of judgment. "It's a design, dear, for that little rundown park near the old courthouse. There's a competition." She leaned closer, examining the model. "The Quiet Knoll? I like that name. And this ramp thingy is cool, way better than just dumping some benches there." She looked up, genuine curiosity in her eyes. "You actually designed this whole thing? Like from scratch?" "Yes," I said, a warmth spreading through me. "From scratch." Her phone pinged, pulling her attention away, but her simple, unprompted validation, "Professional, cool, actually designed this," echoed long after she'd left. It was fuel. The competition deadline loomed just before the anniversary party, two distinct futures vying for attention, one celebrating a past I felt increasingly alienated from, the other offering a tentative blueprint for a future I was just beginning to design. The final stretch towards the competition deadline and the looming 40th anniversary party became a masterclass in compartmentalization. During the day, I was Margaret Pendleton, navigating the increasingly fraught territory of family expectations, fielding calls from a stressed Susan about minor logistical snags. "Margaret, are you sure we have enough dessert forks?" Listening with feigned interest as Robert detailed the nuances of Ordovician period strategy, gently deflecting Thomas's assumptions that I'd be available for last-minute errands related to his work. Evenings and stolen hours, however, belonged to MP in the sanctuary of my small studio, surrounded by sketches and material samples. I immersed myself in the Quiet Knoll. Creative focus was a balm. The low-braided anxiety generated by my family's demands faded when replaced by the satisfying challenge of resolving a tricky grading issue or perfecting the curve of a pathway. My tremor, agitated by tense phone calls, often subsided when my hand was busy with the precise work of drafting or model making. My family's awareness of my preoccupation grew, manifesting as thinly veiled impatient. "Mom, you seem distracted," Thomas commented one evening after I'd given a vague answer to his question about coordinating airport pickup for his visiting colleague. "Is everything all right with your history project?" "Everything's fine, dear," I assured him smoothly, "just very absorbing." Susan, meanwhile, attempted to leverage the upcoming party. "Margaret, since you have so much research time at the library, perhaps you could pick up the finalized menus from the caterer? It would save me a trip." "I'm afraid my schedule doesn't allow for that this week, Susan," I replied politely but firmly. "Perhaps Thomas could handle it?" The suggestion was met with a surprised silence, then a non-committal grunt from Thomas. They weren't accustomed to me redirecting tasks back to them. Robert, surprisingly, was the one who seemed most unsettled, though he couldn't articulate why. He drifted into my studio, ostensibly looking for a misplaced book, but his gaze would linger on the drawings. "Architecture," he murmured once, almost to himself. "Such precise work requires a steady hand." Was it concern, or a subtle questioning of my capability? I couldn't tell. I just kept drawing. The deadline arrived. With trembling hands, a mixture of Parkinson's and sheer nerves, I uploaded the final files for The Quiet Knoll. Drawings, specifications, supporting documents. I used only my initials and the P.O. box address. Clicking submission felt like launching a message in a bottle into a vast ocean. Relief washed over me, immediately followed by a wave of exhaustion and doubt. With the competition submission behind me, the full weight of the impending anniversary party descended. Susan was in overdrive, micromanaging every detail. The house buzzed with pre-party tension. Robert seemed increasingly withdrawn, retreating to his study for long periods. One evening, just days before the event, Susan intercepted me with her ever-present clipboard. "Margaret, about the family toast." "The what?" "The toast, at the party. We thought it would be lovely if you and Robert said a few words together, you know, reaffirming your commitment, thanking the family. Something heartfelt." She beamed, anticipating the emotional centerpiece of her event. The idea of standing beside Robert, performing a public declaration of unity and gratitude after 40 years of feeling increasingly unseen, felt profoundly false. "Susan," I said, keeping my voice level, "Robert and I won't be giving a joint toast. If Robert wishes to speak, he may. If you or Thomas wish to speak about us, you may." Susan stared, nonplussed. "But it's your 40th anniversary. It's traditional. People expect many things, Susan," I replied quietly. "That doesn't make them right or true." I saw the flash of frustration in her eyes, the quick calculation as she likely categorized this as another instance of me being difficult. Fine, let her. "Well," she sniffed, making a note on her clipboard, "I suppose Thomas can say something on behalf of the family then?" She bustled away, already focused on the next item on her list. I stood there for a moment, the lines clear now, not just the lines on my blueprints, but the lines defining my own space, my own truth. They could have their party, their traditions, their expectations. I would attend. I would smile, but I would no longer perform. MP had submitted her design. Margaret Pendleton was quietly submitting her resultation from the role they had written for her. The 40th anniversary party unfolded much as I expected, a glittering, impersonal affair, staged in Thomas and Susan's large, elegantly appointed house. The air hummed with polite conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the subtle undercurrent of business networking. Susan, radiant but visibly stressed, played the role of gracious hostess to perfection. Thomas moved smoothly among his colleagues and clients. Robert seemed adrift, accepting congratulations with a distant air, his thoughts clearly elsewhere. I moved through the rooms, a ghost at my own feast. Dressed in a simple silk dress I'd owned for years, I accepted compliments on reaching such a milestone and smiled vaguely at reminiscences from people I barely knew. Friends of Susan's gushed about the fairy tale nature of a 40-year marriage. Thomas's colleagues clapped Robert on the back, congratulating him on his lovely wife and successful family. I felt profoundly disconnected, like watching a play about someone else's life. "You must be so proud, Margaret," one of Susan's friends effused, gesturing around the crowded room. "Such a beautiful family, such a wonderful celebration." "It's quite something," I murmured, the irony weighing heavily my family, celebrating our longevity while seemingly oblivious to the deep fractures beneath the surface, celebrating us in their house because mine wasn't deemed suitable. Seeking refuge, I found a quiet corner near the French doors, overlooking the meticulously lit garden. Robert found me there moments later, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. His usual composure seemed frayed around the edges. "Quite the turnout," he commented, avoiding my eyes. "Susan certainly knows how to organize," I replied neutrally. He took a slow sip of his drink. "Eleanor? About the house, your house. I've been thinking." "Have you, Robert?" He looked at me then, a flicker of something, regret, confusion, in his eyes. Perhaps we shouldn't have moved the party. Perhaps it did mean more to you than I." He trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. "Perhaps," I agreed softly. It was the closest he'd ever come to acknowledging my feelings about the house I designed. We'd shared for decades, a small concession, 40 years too late. Before the moment could deepen, Thomas tapped his glass for attention. Time for the speeches. He spoke eloquently, thanking their guests, praising Robert's academic achievements and, almost as an afterthought, acknowledging my unwavering support throughout the years. He spoke of family, tradition, endurance. It was a fine speech, perfectly calibrated for the audience. Robert added a few brief, mumbled words, thanking everyone for coming. I stood beside them, smiling faintly, feeling like a carefully placed prop. The next morning, back in the quiet aftermath, the house felt unnaturally still. Robert retreated to his study. I went to the library, needing the neutral territory, the comforting presence of books. Sitting at a public computer, I logged into the email account linked to my P.O. box. My breath caught. An email from the city planning department. Subject: Parquet Revitalization Design Competition. Decision notification. My hand hovered over the mouse. The tremor suddenly pronounced. I clicked. Scan the text. Rigorous review process. Numerous strong submissions. Pleased to inform you. Proposal. The Quiet Knoll by MP. Selected as the winning design. I read it again, the words blurring slightly. Winning design. MEP. Me. A 63-year-old woman whose professional ambitions had been dormant for 4 decades. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy surged through me, so potent it momentarily silenced the tremor. It wasn't about the modest prize money or the local recognition. It was the validation, the knowledge that the architect inside me. I closed my eyes, savoring the feeling. The anniversary party, with its hollow pronouncements and performative affection, faded into insignificance. This felt real. This felt earned. This felt like mine. The quiet botanist, the invisible wife, MEP. They were all me. An MEP had just won. Christina's facade of my old life seemed suddenly flimsy, irrelevant. A new structure, designed by my own. Holding on to the secret of the competition win felt necessary, like shielding a newly sprouted seedling from a harsh wind. I needed to let the reality sink in, to feel its roots take hold within me before exposing it to the unpredictable climate of my family. MEP had a victory. Margaret Pendleton still felt the weight of 40 years of habit. My first official meeting was with Ben, the young city architect assigned to the Parquet project, and Councilwoman Martha. They greeted MP via email, but it was Margaret Pendleton, a woman in her early 60s with neatly combed gray hair and hands that occasionally trembled, who walked into their office. Their initial the Quiet Knoll, my vision of a small urban oasis using native plants, sustainable materials, and accessible design, clearly resonated with them. They spoke with enthusiasm about its potential impact on the neglected downtown corner. Ben seemed to understand my unspoken anxiety. He began, then corrected himself with a smile. Margaret. The city provides a dedicated project manager for logistics and contractor liaison. Your primary role is design integrity, ensuring the final build remains true to your vision. We need your eye, your expertise. Design integrity. Consultation. That felt achievable. More than achievable, it felt like purpose. I left the meeting with a stack of documents and a renewed sense of determination, the fear overshadowed by a quiet excitement. Life in the house with Robert continued its slow, awkward dance. He knew something had shifted fundamentally, but lacked the vocabulary or perhaps the courage to address it directly. He knew about the competition win now, having seen the official announcement in the local paper which, after some digging by a reporter, mentioned MP alongside my full name. "Remarkable, Eleanor," he'd said stiffly, holding the paper. "Architecture. After all this time." There was an undertone of something. Admiration? Accusation? I couldn't quite place. He started making attempts, however clumsy, to bridge the gap, leaving articles about sustainable design on my desk, asking tentative questions about the native plant selections, trying to connect my new work to his own interests. "Did you know," he offered one evening, "that the type of stone you specified for the retaining walls, historically quarried just upstate? Fascinating geological history there." I appreciated the effort, perhaps, but it felt like trying to repair a shattered vase with tape. The cracks ran too deep. Our conversations remained polite, superficial, circling the vast, silent crater where our shared intimacy used to be. The news reached Thomas and Susan, likely via Robert. Their reactions, relayed over dutiful phone calls, were a predictable blend of surprise and a subtle reframing to fit their own narrative. "Mom, winning a design award? That's amazing," Thomas enthused, though his tone lacked genuine warmth. "You'll have to tell the Abernathys. Susan says we should host a little celebratory brunch." "That's very kind, Thomas, but I'm quite busy with the project itself," I demurred. "No need for brunch." Susan, ever practical, immediately saw the social angle. "Margaret, perhaps you could incorporate a small plaque acknowledging the family's support. It would look lovely." "The design doesn't include a plaque, Susan," I replied evenly. Their inability to grasp that this was mine, separate from them, separate from my role as wife and mother, was telling. They saw it as another facet of the Margaret they knew, something to be managed, celebrated, if it reflected well on them, and folded back into the existing family structure. They didn't see MP. They didn't see the independent entity emerging. The official groundbreaking ceremony for the quiet knoll was modest but meaningful. The mayor spoke. Councilwoman Martha highlighted the community benefits. Ben talked about the design's merits. I was introduced, shaking hands, smiling for the local newspaper photographer. Robert was there, lingering at the back. A solitary figure. Thomas and Susan sent their regrets. A last-minute client meeting. A school function for Emily's younger cousins, conveniently ignoring Emily. At 19, was perfectly capable of attending alone if she wished. But Emily was there. She stood beside Grace, my steadfast friend and goddaughter, who had insisted on coming to support me, and David, the horticulturist, who had offered invaluable advice on the planting scheme. Emily watched everything, her expression alight with interest. After the speeches, as I chatted with Councilwoman Martha, Emily approached, holding out her phone. "Grandma, look. I found this online archive of women architects from the 60s. There aren't many, but wow." She showed me profiles, black and white photos of determined-looking young women, pioneers in their field. "You were like them." "I tried to be," I said softly. "You are," she insisted fiercely. "Look." She gestured towards the construction site, where the first outlines of the pathways were being marked. "You're building something." Robert had overheard. He stepped closer, his expression complex. "Your granddaughter is right, Eleanor. You are building something." He paused. I recently found some old letters from your grandmother Elara, the stonemason." He held out a small, faded envelope. Perhaps you'd like to read them." I took the envelope, my fingers brushing his, another piece of my hidden history, unearthed by him. A peace offering? An attempt to connect through shared ancestry? I didn't know, but holding that tangible link to Elara, the woman who worked with stone while standing on the ground where my own design was taking shape, it felt like a convergence. The past wasn't just something to escape, it was also a foundation upon which to build. The months during the construction of the quiet knoll were a period of intense focus and quiet transformation. Overseeing the project, even in a consultative role, demanded energy and attention I hadn't realized I still possessed. There were challenges, unexpected utility lines discovered underground, budget adjustments, mediating minor disputes between contractors, but navigating them felt purposeful, engaging. It was a stark contrast to the draining, often fuel energy expended managing household tensions and unspoken resentments. Working alongside Ben, the young city architect, was invigorating. He treated Emmy with professional respect, valuing my design insights while handling the bureaucratic hurdles with youthful efficiency. David, my horticulturist friend, became an informal consultant on the plantings, often meeting me on site to discuss soil conditions or the best placement for the shade-loving ferns. Our friendship deepened, rooted in shared passions and easy companionship. My physical health seemed to benefit from the engagement. While the Parkinson's tremor remained a daily reality, the sense of purpose often overshadowed the fatigue. Regular walks around the construction site, sketching in the open air. At home, the dynamic with Robert settled into a pattern of strained coexistence. He seemed to be making an effort, in his way. He read the letters from my grandmother Elara with me, marveling at her descriptions of learning the stonemason's craft in Italy. He left newspaper clippings about urban green spaces on my desk, small gestures, tentative bridges across the chasm that separated us. Too much had been broken, too much time lost in silence and misunderstanding. The house itself, the structure I had designed with such youthful hope, began to feel less like a home and more like a beautifully crafted container holding separate lives. We moved around each other like polite ghosts, haunted by the specter of what might have been and the reality of what was. The question of divorce remained unasked, but hung in the air like dust motes in the attic. Thomas and Susan's interactions with me became primarily logistical, calls about coordinating visits for Robert's medical appointments, which they now managed, albeit grudgingly, requests for me to sign financial documents related to closing out old joint accounts. Their initial bewilderment about my project had settled into a kind of wary acceptance, though Susan couldn't resist occasional comments about how time-consuming my little park project seemed to be. They still didn't truly grasp its significance to me. Emily, however, was a bright spot. She visited often, genuinely fascinated by the construction process and my design work. She declared landscape architecture her definite new major and spent hours in my studio, asking questions, absorbing information. She helped me organize my old sketches, scanned my grandmother Elara's letters. In her, I saw not just a reflection of my younger self, but the possibility of a different future for women balancing creativity and family, hopefully with more support than I ever had. As the quiet knoll neared completion, the graceful ramp installed, the native grasses taking root, the benches awaiting their first visitors, I felt a growing sense of accomplishment, quiet but profound. This small parquet was more than just a revitalization project. It was a reclamation of my own voice, my own vision. One crisp afternoon, standing on the knoll platform, reviewing the final planting plan with David, I saw Robert approaching the site. He walked slowly, leaning more heavily on his cane than before. He didn't come directly towards us, but stood at the edge, observing. David glanced from Robert back to me, a silent question in his eyes. "Old foundations," I murmured, more to myself than to him. Robert eventually came over. He looked not at me, but at the park taking shape. "It's quite remarkable, Eleanor," he said, his voice low. "The way you envisioned the light here." He gestured towards the oak tree, where dappled sunlight filtered through the leaves onto a curved bench below. He saw it. He finally saw the design, the intent. "Thank you, Robert," I replied simply. He cleared his throat. "I've been doing some reading about Parkinson's, about stress management." He looked at me then, his gaze direct, vulnerable. "I understand better now what you needed, what I failed to provide." It was an admission, raw and decades late. A tremor ran through my hand, strong and insistent. I met his gaze. "Yes," I said softly. "I believe you do." There was a sadness in the moment, a recognition of the unbridgeable distance created by years of neglect. The walls of the quiet knoll were nearly complete, solid and reassuring. The walls around my old life, however, felt ready to crumble entirely. It was time. The completion of the quiet knoll coincided with my decision. The parquet stood as a testament to resilience, to beauty coaxed from neglect, a metaphor I couldn't ignore. It was time to dismantle the old structure of my marriage, the one whose foundations had proven so unstable. I told Robert quietly, calmly, one evening in the living room of the house we both knew was no longer truly a shared home. "Robert, I need to finalize things. I want a divorce." He didn't look surprised this time, just weary. He sank into his armchair, the one closest to his rock collection, looking older than his late 60-something years. "I suppose I knew this was coming," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "After everything, the finances, Elara's letters, seeing you build this." He gestured vaguely, encompassing the park, my rediscovered self. There were no arguments, no recriminations, just a quiet, profound sadness. We discussed the logistics with a strange, detached civility. The house, heavily mortgaged due to his hidden debts, would need to be sold. My lawyer had already ensured my inherited assets were protected. We agreed to use a mediator to finalize the division of remaining possessions, avoiding the acrimony of lawyers battling over furniture and photo albums. Telling Thomas and Susan was less civilized. Thomas reacted with bewildered anger. "Divorce? Now?" "Mom, are you serious? What about Dad's health? Who's going to manage everything?" His immediate concern, as always, was practical, logistical, centered on how this would impact him. Susan was aghast, focusing on the social implications. "Margaret, at your age, what will people say? 40 years, throwing it all away. Have you thought about how this looks?" "Yes, Susan," I replied calmly. "I've thought about how it feels, and it feels necessary. Robert and I will handle the details. Your role is to support your father." Emily, when I told her separately, was quiet, thoughtful. "Will you be okay, Grandma?" she asked, her concern genuine. "Financially? And, emotionally?" "I will be more than okay, dear," I assured her, touched by her maturity. Sometimes, dismantling the process of physically separating our lives was like excavating layers of sediment, sorting through decades of accumulated possessions, his books and rocks, my long-used sewing supplies, shared furniture holding family memories, boxes of childhood relics. Each item unearthed prompted a flicker of memory, a pang of nostalgia, but underscored the necessity of the separation. We were curators of a shared museum, but the exhibition was closing. During this period, I leaned heavily on my own support structure: Grace, David, my small circle of new friends from the art and botany worlds. They offered practical help, quiet encouragement, and, most importantly, validation of my decision. They saw Margaret, an MP, not just Robert's wife or Thomas's mother. The house sold quickly, thankfully. The remaining equity, after paying off the mortgages Robert had hidden, was modest. We divided it according to the mediated agreement. Saying goodbye to the house itself, the physical structure I had poured my youthful dreams into, was poignant. I walked through the empty rooms one last time, touching the walls, remembering the hopes I'd had. But there was no deep regret. That house represented a life I had outgrown, a blueprint that no longer fit. I found a bright, airy apartment in a building overlooking a city park. Not my park, but a pleasant green space. It had a spare room perfect for a studio. Moving in felt like shedding a heavy cloak. I arranged my drafting table by the window, unpacked my paints, hung my grandmother Ilara's letters, now framed, on the wall. The book, The Quiet Botanist, was released. The launch event, held at the Botanical Garden Library, was filled with friends, colleagues from the Park Project, fellow artists, members of garden clubs. Dr. Evans gave a warm introduction. David beamed from the front row. Grace stood beside me, radiating pride. Emily brought a group of her landscape architecture classmates. Robert, Thomas, and Susan were not invited. Looking out at the faces, people who knew me as Margaret, as MP, as the quiet botanist, I felt a sense of belonging that was entirely new. It wasn't the prescribed belonging of family obligation, but the chosen belonging of shared interest, mutual respect, and genuine affection. The structures of my life were now of my own design, built on a foundation of self-discovery and resilience. The tremor in my hand was still present, a quiet reminder of the journey. But my spirit felt steady, grounded, rooted in the fertile soil of a life finally claimed as my own. Life after the divorce settled into a rhythm dictated by my own priorities: painting, botanical research, consultations on small community design projects, and precious time spent with Grace, David, and Emily. The apartment, filled with light and plants and the scent of linseed oil, felt like a true sanctuary. The Parkinsons remained my constant companion, requiring diligent management, but it no longer felt like a looming shadow. Instead, it was part of the texture of my life, a condition to navigate, not a sentence. My art continued to evolve, inspired by my grandmother Ilara's legacy and my own deep connection to the natural world. I began incorporating elements of stonework patterns and geological textures into my landscape paintings. My work gained further recognition, leading to representation by a small, respected gallery downtown. Selling my paintings wasn't primarily about the income anymore. It was about sharing my vision, connecting with others through the language of color and form. Emily thrived in her landscape architecture program, often bringing her projects to my studio for critique and discussion. Our relationship blossomed into a unique blend of grandmother-granddaughter affection and mentor-mentee collaboration. Watching her passion ignite, seeing her develop her own design voice was profoundly rewarding. It felt like tending a precious seedling, ensuring it had the light and space to grow in ways I never did at her age. I heard occasional updates about Robert, Thomas, and Susan through the grapevine or from Emily. Robert's health was stable but frail. He lived quietly, looked after by rota by his son and daughter-in-law, who seemed perpetually stressed and overworked. Their lives, once cushioned by my invisible labor, now clearly showed the strain. They made no further attempts to contact me directly, perhaps finally accepting the finality of the boundaries I had drawn. There was a quiet sadness in knowing they struggled, but no guilt. Their struggles were the result of their own choices, their own blindness. David and I continued our companionable explorations of gardens and nature trails. Our friendship was a source of steady warmth, uncomplicated by demands or expectations. We were two independent people choosing to share parts of our journey, understanding the value of both solitude and connection. Grace, now a respected neurologist, often joined us for Sunday brunch. Her presence was a constant reminder that family isn't always defined by blood, but by choice, by care, by showing up. She was the daughter of my heart, and her success felt intertwined with my own liberation. One afternoon, while attending a lecture on urban biodiversity at the university, I saw Councilwoman Martha. She greeted me warmly. "Margaret, wonderful to see you. You know, the Quiet Knoll has become a real gem for the city. We get so many positive comments. People love the accessibility, the native plantings. It's exactly what that corner needed." She smiled. "You should be very proud." And I was, not just of the park, but of the journey it represented. The journey from silent accommodation to quiet assertion, from invisible wife to visible creator. Later that week, sorting through some papers, I found the rendering of my old thesis project, the community art center I designed in college. I looked at it for a long time, comparing it to the photos of the Quiet Knoll. The style was different, naturally, marked by youthful ambition rather than mature reflection, but the core principles were there. Light, accessibility, spaces designed to foster community and quiet contemplation. The architect I was then hadn't entirely disappeared. She had simply been waiting, patiently, within the blueprints of silence. My life now wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements. It was about the steady rhythm of work that I loved, the warmth of chosen companionship, the quiet satisfaction of inhabiting spaces, both internal and external, that felt authentically mine. At 60-something, living with a chronic illness, I felt more grounded, more vibrant, more hopeful than I had in my youth. The future wasn't a closed book, but a series of open spaces, waiting for new lines, new colors, new designs yet to be imagined. And MP, the architect, the artist, the quiet botanist, Margaret, was ready to draw them.